Watching two big green people wrestle around on the sand and call each other dummies sounds like the premise for a kid's show, and yet somehow it's not. Hi y'all, Snarky J Cosplay here. The first episode of She-Hulk is officially out, and after having sat through the entire thing so you don't have to, I can tell you I would much rather have watched paint dry. Without giving too much away, I can tell you that the first episode of She-Hulk Attorney at Law plays out as unfunny, juvenile, and completely misguided. My rating for this episode is a probably generous 3 out of 10. Ode to its corny, childish humor in a show that is clearly not meant for kids, childish dialogue, and completely unentertaining action. Yes, I'm aware this is a show about big green super people, but if it's a show directed at adults, it could try a little harder to be less of a big steaming pile of nonsense, for lack of a better word. So, let's get into it. From this point on, there will be spoilers for episode 1 of She-Hulk Attorney at Law ahead. The show opens on Jennifer Walters as she's in her office practicing a closing argument for a case. Right away, we're thrown into this sitcom style of dialogue and humor as Jen interacts with some of her co-workers. Right away, they're kind of showing us what the rest of the show is gonna be. So if in the first few minutes you already feel bored like I did, this is definitely not gonna be the show for you. As Jen is left alone in her office, she breaks the fourth wall and begins to explain to the audience that this isn't just a lawyer show and that it also follows the fact that she is a Hulk. And so she starts to tell us the story of how she got her powers. We flash back to Jen and her cousin Bruce Banner traveling in a car together, during which Jen is having a spirited discussion about Captain America's virginity or lack thereof, dialogue which felt pulled directly from a Tumblr thread written in 2013. We're spared much more of this torturous dialogue by the fact that Jen is essentially stopped by this big spaceship that appears out of nowhere. She pulls off the road and ends up basically crashing the car off the side of the road. It would have been so much better had they just rolled credits right there. But in the aftermath of the crash, Jen goes to save her cousin Bruce, and by pulling him out of the car, essentially ends up with his blood dripping into one of her open wounds. With this, we see her first transformation into She-Hulk, and she disappears into the woods alone. When she wakes hours later, she finds herself outside of this weird dive bar, and she ends up traveling into the bathroom to try and clean up and find somebody whose phone she can use so she can call Bruce. Only in a completely nonsensical turn of events, a group of partying women enter the bathroom and instead of trying to help this disheveled barefoot woman, start trying to give her a makeover, brushing whatever onto her forehead and still criticizing her lack of shoes. Evidently, somebody does offer her real help because she does go outside to wait to be picked up by Bruce. While she's waiting for Bruce, she's approached by a group of guys that have probably had a little too much to drink and start catcalling and sort of harassing her. In retaliation, we see her once again transform into She-Hulk, and the next time we see her conscious, she's waking up very slowly in Bruce Banner's remote home/lab in Mexico. Bruce, now in the form of Smart Hulk, starts to explain how exactly Jen has developed these Hulk powers. And despite Marvel using sort of ramping up hero type music, the scene just falls flat. The show never really knows when it wants to be serious and when it wants to be funny, and it actually falls flat at doing both. After we get to watch Smart Hulk make pancakes for breakfast, and a scene where Jen hulks her way out of a chamber of literal buzzsaws that Bruce Banner just happens to have laying around this place, we find that the dynamic between She-Hulk and Jennifer Walters is actually completely different than Bruce Banner and Hulk used to be. She-Hulk isn't the alter ego that Hulk once was to Bruce Banner, she's just a different form for Jennifer. Bruce Banner is so shocked by this that he literally uses the word bruh. Mark Ruffalo, who portrays Bruce Banner, is a 54-year-old man. Therefore, I can imagine that Bruce Banner in the MCU is about the same age. I don't know how many 50-year-old men you guys know, but I've never met one that uses the word bruh unironically. And yet Marvel thought, let's write this into the script. By now, it's a miracle I haven't thrown my remote. After that, we get to see a Hulk training montage featuring an abundance of stretch pants, boulder throwing, and some some of the most annoying music I have ever heard. After a number of playful insults and throwing around the phrase dick move, they end up getting drunk off margaritas, which is yet another reminder that this is not a kids show despite how frustratingly juvenile it is. One thing that I thought fell criminally flat during this episode is that during a conversation between Bruce and Jen, she mentions that she, as a woman, is constantly trying to withhold her rage so she's not criticized when she's being catcalled or being mansplained or being treated like less than her male counterparts. And as a woman, I found it more patronizing than powerful. Besides, any real statement this show tries to make is completely undermined by the fact that moments after, we get to watch two full-grown green adults wrestle and call each other words like lunkhead and dummy. Multiple Hulk claps and thrown coconuts later, I'm really starting to wonder why I pay for Disney Plus when The Mandalorian isn't on. When we get back to present day and we think we're finally gonna see a little bit of Jennifer Walters finally strut her lawyer stuff, her closing argument is interrupted by Titania crashing through the courthouse wall. And naturally, soundtracked by what I can only describe as 80s cop show music, Jennifer Walters reveals herself as the She-Hulk and saves the day. And that's it. That completes the first episode of a show that is too juvenile and entirely too unfunny to be entertaining to adults, yet too weird and adult for kids under the age of 12. At least the awful dialogue makes the somewhat lacking CGI look amazing. I don't really have much else to say about this episode. From what I've seen of the folks who went to the premiere and got to see an early 4-episode screening instead of just the one that got released today, the first episode sort of establishes what the rest of the show is gonna be like, in which case, we're all in for a long few weeks. But you guys know, I'm here to review it anyway. I feel this might be the kind of series that should have been left on the cutting room floor. That's all from me. I've been Snarky J. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts on the first episode of She-Hulk in the comments below.